Hey. Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for this talk with artist Golnar Adili. Adili is concurrently exhibiting at both Q and CBA. Found in Translation, a story of language, play, and a personal archive is on view at Q through February 26th. And Father Gave Water, Baabaa Aab Daad, is on view at Center for Book Arts through March 26th. My name is Camilo Otero, and I'm Artist Programs Manager at CBA. CBA is a nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting the book arts since 1974. We have an exhibitions program as well as artist in residence program, classes, and studio access.
My
Hello,
name is
Wendy.
Wendy, and I'm the Programs Associate at Q. The Q Art Foundation is a nonprofit gallery based in East Chelsea, and we're dedicated to supporting emerging and underrepresented artists.
Before we get started, we acknowledge that Center for Book Arts and Q Art Foundation are on unceded territory of the Lenape people.
We also have a few notes on accessibility to go over before we get started. Live captions are available tonight if you click on the CC closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitles. The event today is being recorded and will be available to view online afterwards. If you do not want your face or name to appear publicly, please keep your video off, and you can also rename yourself with an alias if you'd like. Please also keep your mics muted.
Thank you, Wendy. Now on to Golnar. Golnar Adili is a mixed media artist, educator, and designer with a focus on diasporic identity. She holds a master's degree in architecture from the University of Michigan and has attended numerous residencies, including Rockefeller Foundation for the Arts in Italy and Macmillan in Brooklyn. Adili has shown her work nationally and internationally at venues including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and the Craft and Folk Art Museum in LA. She has received several grants, including the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant and NYFA Fellowship in Printmaking, Drawing, and Artist Books. Her artist books are in several collections, including the Library of Congress, Rutgers University, Yale University, and University of Michigan. This event will have three parts. First, Golnar will speak with writer Sarah Burney. Burney has interviewed Golnar for Kajal magazine about Father Gave Water, the work showcased at Center for Book Arts in this moment. Sarah Burney is a writer, curator, and independent arts worker based in New York. Raised in Kuwait and Pakistan, Burney is a specialist of contemporary printmaking and art from South Asia and the Middle East. She's interested in exploring artists, materials, and processes and diversifying discussions in contemporary art. Her professional experience also includes the community printmaking studio Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop and the feminist art collective Guerrilla Girls.
After speaking with Sarah, Golnar is going to speak with Emily Chun. Emily is a Korean American art writer based in New York. She has written for various publications such as the Brooklyn Rail, Art Asia Pacific, and Ocula, and has held curatorial positions at the Tufts University Art Galleries and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Emily was selected to write an essay about Golnar's work through the Art Critic Mentoring Program, which is a collaboration between Q and the International Association of Art Critics. The program pairs emerging art writers with mentors in the field. Emily's essay, Translatory Gestures, can be found on the Q website and also in the exhibition catalog accompanying Golnar's show at Q. Golnar's show at Q is curated and mentored by Kevin Beasley. It is a formal investigation of language featuring artist books, prints, and several installation pieces. And it draws from her personal family archive and also references 14th century Persian poetry. Just to note, tomorrow is the last day to see the exhibit at Q. There will be a closing reception at the gallery tomorrow from 5 to 7 p.m. So after the Golnar has a chance to speak with each writer separately, we'll end with a joint conversation between the three of them. And this will also be an opportunity to have a question and answer session. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout the event.
We would like to give special thanks to our members and donors and to the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, New York State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts for making this exhibition and program possible. Thank you. Now, Golnar and Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, but also for putting on this program. I'm still sort of shocked by the serendipity of it all, that we get to have these two very different exhibitions of Golnar's work happening at the same time, that we get to have this focused look at Baabaa Aab Daad at the Center of Book Arts, and then we literally get to cross the street and get this sweeping panoramic view at the Q Art Foundation. So I think we're all of us that are interested in Golnar's work, we're super lucky to be here today. And I remember when Golnar asked me to be part of this, sorry, I'm just going to share my screen, to be part of this program today. I was so surprised that this was happening at the same time that Golnar and I were in conversation about an interview about Baabaa Aab Daad, which is the artist book that's on view at the Center for Book Arts. And it's actually also included in the Q Art Show. And the more I think about it now, I'm less surprised that this is happening. I think Q is, like Camila was saying, CBA is a really unique space where art is being made collaboratively, it's being taught, it's being exhibited, we're talking about it, and it's sort of, art is also being sold. You can purchase artist books at CBA. And I came of age almost as an arts and culture worker in a very similar space at the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop, which is a community studio that does all of these programming, the same programs that CBA does. And I think it's the nature of these spaces that make us want to sort of slow down and look deeply at one work of art. And that is sort of the whole premise behind my column and the exhibition that's happening at CBA, that you stop and look at the various iterations, materials, and processes an artist questioned and investigated before they made a work of art, before the final piece happened. And this exhibition, which you're looking at right now, it's a small and mighty display. I think you learn so much, not just about this one artwork, but about how Golnar works, how she approaches material, how she problem solves. And this exhibition is actually on for another month. Is that right, Camilo? At CBA. So if you have the chance, I really do encourage everyone who's in New York to try and see the show, because it's super unique to see it in the community workspace. And if you can do it tomorrow, that's even better, because then you can walk across the street and see the wonderful exhibition at Q as well. That was a super long-winded way of saying I'm super excited to keep looking at this work with Golnar. And I wanted to start by just asking Golnar to introduce the work to all of us here who potentially haven't seen it or aren't familiar with it. Golnar, you're muted.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. And yeah, so this work came about as when the pandemic hit, I just sat down and started to brainstorm about what I was going to do at that moment. And it just, you know, I found these extra materials, these leftovers that I had found, and the pixels of the wooden cubes that you see. And I just started to play with them, and I immediately thought this really complex poem that I have been thinking about, Hafez's poem, I wanted to make the verbs, because before I was, following a string of things, and I finally, this was kind of like a very exceptional moments. I allowed myself to do whatever I wanted and just play. And so I started to make those verbs. And then that led to me being, because I'm around my child and I really want to teach her Persian or surround her with Persian, because I think that seeing something and constantly seeing something is very important for a child, especially since she's so surrounded by the English alphabet. And so I just I went to the fundamentals from there, and I made the Persian alphabet. And then from that, I kind of went into a middle ground, and it was a very intuitive idea to make Baabaa Aab Daad, because it's the first sentence that the Persian children, Iranian children, learn in first grade. And it just came to me. And when something comes that intuitively, I take it kind of seriously, or at least I investigate it. And at first I didn't know what kind of a casing it was going to have, or what was the context. And that came through the different iterations that took me there. So it's my work is very process oriented, and that's kind of the overarching like concept and ideas and story of basically how it came to be. Did you want me to talk more about the physicality of it?
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Sure. So Baabaa Aab Daad is a book. So I like to redefine the book format, and it is something that you can hold in your hand. So that's the scale, and you open it because it has a flap that allows you to do that, and it's magnet, so it's got a little satisfying opening. And then when you open it, the first panel that you see, so I'm talking from upper right, and then in the middle you see when it opens, the folded panel has the alphabet on it with the phonetics, and it has a personal history there of Mr. Sayahi, who, when I started to research Baabaa Aab Daad, it just I came to this person. And this person is significant, but nowhere do they speak about him officially. And he basically revamped the first grade Iranian or Persian alphabet, or Persian first grade book. And he also was the co-founder of the Iranian nomadic schools. And so I thought, as someone who likes to, look at small archives, I felt like he needed a mention there, and it would be nice to kind of tuck him in there. And also, like with all these, I like these panels to kind of reveal different things and come to different surprises. So that was a good place for him. And then basically, when you open it totally, the sentence Baabaa Aab Daad is deconstructed in the middle, all clustered together. And to come to that, it was more of a kind of shifting things around, like puzzle, and what made sense compositionally and was cool. And then the other panels, they are these felt kind of carvings that I was very much inspired by the way my child plays with these puzzles and fits things in, and they're just so simple. And I thought, why not teach her language through this? So then you can kind of place things by the way they look. And that was very much inspired by the way my child plays and how she learns about the world, language or not.
Play is so clearly at the forefront of this piece, play and childhood, in sort of its tactile, interactive nature, in the fact that there's an alphabet in there, but also in the primary education history that you've embedded, tucked in there for all of us to discover. But something I learned in conversation with you is that Baabaa Aab Daad has a sort of more sinister linguistic doppelganger, Baabaa Aab Daad, which is Baba gave blood, which is something else that you have a personal history with. And I was hoping you could share that with everybody as well.
Sure. You know, if you grew up in Iran at a certain point, which it was like my generation, we observed, I got there just after the revolution, and I was there when the war started. And it was crazy. I mean, you will not, you know, when you say or hear Baabaa Aab Daad, it always, in my mind at least, follows with Baba Khun Daad, Baba Jun Daad, father gave blood, father gave life. And it's because they took that, you know, they meaning the Islamic Republic, kind of took that sentence and made it into a song that you know, people or children would sing, and then they made a documentary about that, not a documentary, a film, and basically to kind of you know, get the masses going with this with the slogans of war and you know, martyrdom, and so it has this very dark kind of bloody side to it, or at least that is in the background of it all.
I want to talk more about why that stayed in the background, but you know, it's so, in the context of what's happening in the world today, it's so chilling to consider this phrase and think about, you know, the consequences of this kind of language, and think about what little children in Ukraine are going through right now, and the importance of sort of telling these hard stories in the vain hopes that perhaps we won't do this to each other all over again. And in your work, and you can see this especially at the exhibition at Q, you do a really beautiful job of weaving the human interpersonal consequences of a conflict into your artwork. You weave sort of notes of the trauma and the loss amid your playful exploration of form and shape and language. And part of me was a little bit, I wanted to talk about Baabaa Aab Daad, but I was also a little, I was hoping that I would think of something else to talk about, because Baabaa Aab Daad is not about trauma. And I didn't want to drag trauma into this discussion because, you know, from our part of the world, I think our hard stories, there's a certain appetite for hard stories about our part of the world that can be a little strange, you know, and I think all of us try to counter that narrative sometimes in almost a defensive reaction. And I really wanted to champion the play part of your work, but this kept nagging at me. So I had to bring this up to you. And I want to ask, like, is it annoying to you that trauma is being brought up in this conversation? How do you navigate all these feelings about the hard stories and the play and being from our part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I totally hear you about sensationalizing or that being on the foreground when people talk to you, oh my God. And a lot of times what becomes annoying about that is that they get the facts wrong, or that it's just so it's a nuanced, everything is nuanced, right? And so it's a little tricky, but at the same time, it is what it is, and you know, we are America is like a bunch of different people coming together, and we're constantly learning our stories and sharing our stories and having to correct our stories, and so I see that as kind of a given in my baggage, right? Like that is kind of my responsibility too, to talk about it. And so I'm not at all annoyed that you brought this up because I think it only opens it up. I'm all about letting people in, especially since the work can be opaque because of the language difference. But you know, I'm bringing it to the table, so I should expect questions. And also, I want to be generous. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And to talk about the traumas, it is part of the story. And so as much as I didn't want to go directly there, it is in the, you know, in the back room. So if you walk long enough with it, then you'll get there. And so that's what's really important, is that I really appreciate when people spend time with something. And it is also a sign of that this is good art, or that this is something that someone wants to keep looking at and investigate, right? And so if you go that far, then I'm happy to take you further.
So how did
question, Sarah?
You did. I think I asked you 5 questions when trying to ask you one anyway.
Okay.
But how did play win here? Was this a conscious, deliberate choice to champion the play over the harder memory? Like how did water beat blood?
Yeah, so it really, I don't know exactly when play came in, but one thing is that I love doing gymnastics with form. I love playing with form myself. And, but I always have to find very hard reasons for it, or, you know, just be like, is this correct? Or is this, you know, and then it was really being surrounded by my child and the way she is in the world and her toys, that I was even pushed further into it. Also, I think it has to do with, I don't want to call myself a mature artist because I'm not there yet, but as the years go on, I'm giving myself more freedom to play. And because I don't need to prove myself to myself. And once I got over that, I feel like I'm like, oh yeah, I like to do this, so I'll do it. And with this particular piece, it was really me sitting down, having unemployment and being able to focus on my work, having 4 or 5 hours a day to do that. And I really just gave myself to the play and really had fun. And the wooden block module is really you know, kind of a significant play invitation too. So, you know, all of that kind of came together. And finally, I had a reason too. I had, you know, I wanted to just produce all this alphabet around my daughter, for her to be surrounded. So I just kind of took cue from her. And
it's surprising what motherhood does to the practice. It's unexpected.
yeah.
We've touched on like the block and this work itself. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about, at what point did you envision this as an artist book? What did it always come to your mind as an artist book? Why did it have to be a book?
Yeah, well, I consider, like, the definition of book for me is a very open, wide one. I think it has to do with the scale. And as soon as it was a puzzle thing, it needed a home. And that home is just automatically a book to me, because it's something you hold. And I was like, well, you probably open it somehow. It probably has fragments and an architecture. So I'm now reminded of when I took Barbara Muriello's class in box making. It was the beginning of my residency at the Center for Book Arts. And I just want to say a big shout out to the Center for Book Arts, because they are amazing. And I really found my tribe there. And my residency started right when I gave birth. So that was just also amazing. But anyways, I took that workshop, and I remember just the first day, just being so excited. And I went home to my partner and I said, I think I found my tribe. And the thing was that Barbara said was like, architect, you know, I said, I have a background in architecture, this is so cool. And she was like, yes, box making and book is like small architecture. And I was like, yes. So
Someone say something?
sorry.
And at your exhibition at Q, there is, I believe, 2 more artist books on display,
Right.
right?
So,
And do you see you really are a multimedia artist. You're making 2D work, you make these large installations, and you're making these small books. And where do you see your practice pulling you now?
that's a very interesting question. I want to go deeper into research now that I've done this exhibition, and it's just, I think I'm craving that, because I really want to look into memory, visual memory, because I myself have very deep visual memory, and I think it's such an interesting thing. And also kind of, I've archived my daughter's, I guess it's my disease. I've archived my daughter's art so far, and it's just been so interesting to see the marks changing. And I'm just really interested in this whole development thing. You know, I was always interested in the Gestalt, which is how we see the world. So it's like a perception, science of perception. And now literally seeing how my daughter archives the world and makes connections and puts them in different groups is just completely fascinating to me. And I want to understand our brain, I guess. And I don't know how that's going to show itself in the work, but I really like this play path that I'm going in. And I want to get more how do you say, kind of you know, just be a little bit, do it with more awareness, I guess, and understand the background science of it, and more intentionally. That was the word I was looking for, with more intentional knowledge of it. So I just want to dig in and look. And I always have to be busy. I have to have busy hands. So that's not a problem. Both of these books are halfway edition. Don't tell us. But so I'm making them, or you know, they're gonna come back and fill my time while, and then I can listen to audiobooks and think while I make.
Your approach to your process and your material has, I feel, been playful almost from the start of your practice. And perhaps that's informed by your architecture background, but you've really approached art making in from many different ways. And it's interesting, and at the same time, I don't want to use the word maturing the same way you didn't want to use it, but I see you moving away from your father's personal archive to research and sort of allowing new inputs in, and your daughter's archive in as well. And do you feel there must be a strange sense of overlap watching your daughter at this age, which was the same age that you were when you were separated from your father? Is there a mixing of sort of thinking of your father and contemplating more deeply on his archive while at the same time watching your daughter?
Well, let me just say that I'm completely triggered right now because of all these overlaps. It is a very tough time in my life to see my daughter exactly at the same age that I went through that really big trauma. And that's why this exhibition coming now and looking at these imagery is so strange for me, the timing of it. And so it just, all of this just reminds me how delicate children are, but also how resilient they are. And I'm starting to grieve my own losses again, from the standpoint of Asia, or my daughter. So it's really interesting, all these reflections, and the connections between, you know, all these like 3 different generations. And so that is all I gotta say. And, you know, it does make me understand my parents a little bit differently. Not that differently, except for I think that they were just, you know, really radical, let's say. And that's, you know, it really takes me through this path of understanding the human being, which I think is like really interesting to me. And I just was watching Faith Ringgold's, I don't know why I'm even saying this, video on the new museum, because she has a retrospective and I can't wait to see it. But she said that she works with her own experience, and you just talking about the archives, it just clicked. I was like, yeah, we all work with our own experiences, but some more directly. And anyways, just had to bring that up. So
Well, we're almost at the end of our time, but I just wanted to end by thanking you for being so generous with your experience, even though it's often hard. It's playful, but it's often hard. But your sharing it preserves it for forever, and that's hopefully that's going to be useful, and people will not repeat all of this again. But I wanted to end on a high note. I wanted to keep talking about play, but I think Emily, who's going to take over now, is going to pick up on that thread as well. So thank you so much, Golnar, and
thank you.
everyone at CBA for doing this.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah.
Let's stop sharing.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Can you all see that? Is that working?
Yes, we can see it. I mean,
Okay.
I can see it.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really lovely. And thanks everyone for being here. Really excited to be speaking to Golnar and just ask more questions about her brilliant exhibit at Q Foundation. So yeah, as Sarah said, I want to kind of expand on her point of play being at the forefront of not just Baabaa Aab Daad, but Golnar's practice as a whole, because I think there are a lot of interesting implications there. And not only because of the work's resemblance to children's toys in the form of the woodblocks, or because it's an homage to childhood. So I'm currently reading this book called, it's actually right here, it's called The Disappearance of Rituals by this Korean-German philosopher named Byung-Chul Han. It's fantastic. And one chapter in particular really made me think of Golnar's work in the Q exhibit, and I'm going to read a very short excerpt here. Okay. Because of the compulsion of work and production, we are losing the capacity to play. We only rarely make playful use of language, we only put it to work. It is obliged to communicate information or produce meaning. As a result, we have no access to forms of language that shine all by themselves. Language as a medium of information has no splendor. It does not seduce. Poems are structures with strict forms that shine all by themselves. In poetry, language plays. The poetic principle returns pleasure to language through a radical break with the economy of the production of meaning. This is why, and this is Baudrillard that he is quoting here, this is why the poetic is the insurrection of language against its own laws. So the reason I thought about your work when I read this is because I think your work really embodies this kind of playful use of language that Han talks about. because in your works, you use language not as information or as meaning making necessarily. So in the floor installation, for example, you created these wooded maquettes of verb pairings in a 14th century poem by a mystic poet named Hafez, which I think you can probably explain better than I can. So as you can see here, it's kind of like arranged in this hourglass shape or like an X chromosome on the floor. And here you kind of play with language primarily through playing with its forms and shapes, and kind of conceiving of language in spatial terms to see how words can have a life or a physical presence beyond the bounds of their two-dimensionality. And so my question here is, in playing with language in this way, what do you think that does to language, and to the Persian language in particular? Or is there any part of this quote that I just read that you don't agree with, that or that you think your work does in fact produce extra meaning outside of the forms?
And what did you just say? Your work does produce meaning outside of the works, or doesn't?
So I guess I'm kind of opening it up to see if you maybe disagree with a quote, because the main kind of conceit of the quote is that like you can find like whatever meaning you need just in the forms, and you don't need like an extraneous meaning outside of the forms. But I guess my main question is kind of like, when you play with language in this way with its forms and shapes, what do you think that does to language and to Persian in particular?
Right. So when I, gave myself permission to play with it, it was really to compare, the depth of the poem and the meaning that was suggested in layers that I still haven't gotten to the bottom of, I feel like, almost is, for me as a visual person who also loves rhythm, is kind of impossible to translate or to get to without doing this. And so I think that this kind of really opens it up for me and makes new forms and new meanings. And I was really compelled to do that when I saw how my daughter plays with language. And doesn't get it wrong, almost gets it wrong, and then plays with it. And it's really to understand all the different sides of it and how it's used. And so, and so I was really at first I was not giving myself permission to do that. And I was saying, well, what does this mean? And how is this formal investigation really conveying that meaning? And it really had to go through that process of letting it go somehow to be able to then infuse it with more meaning, and also allowing whatever comes to my mind intuitively to kind of play out. And that's why iteration and process is really important. Like I was saying, this is the aim and the kind of goal of this piece is to just look at the difference between the two verbs. So that's why I crisscross them. They're kind of dancing. They're slowly merging into each other, and then switching places. And all of this, I feel like it really helps you flesh it out. I'm sorry. And and I have to say, I really like the quote that you read, and I just don't disagree with it at all. And I think that I definitely think that in poetry, the poet is playing between content and form, and then for me to take that form and do my own thing with it and then arrive at a content is almost a reversal of that other process. And why not? It might not arrive at that process. It might take it somewhere else, but that's okay. And that is part of the meaning, because that is what I understood from it. So I'm kind of respecting individual understanding of language here. And what does it do to Persian, the way I play with it? I don't know. At first, I because I saw over time how the English speaker was responding to my work, which was purely formal. Then I said, actually, let's take this and run with it. And why not? Because I'm kind of doing that. Might as well just kind of go all the way with it. And that was really great because that did come to a meaning. A meaning was produced more clearly, I feel like, once I allowed myself to just look at it purely as form. But then at the same time, I can't really say that I divorce myself from meaning completely, because I know the meaning and that I'm already biased. So here maybe I'm disagreeing with the philosopher because you don't know how much of it is actually influencing the work.
Yeah, that reminds me. So the interview that you did with Sarah, which was really great. I wrote down something you said in that interview where you were talking about this Hafez poem, which I think maybe it might be good to kind of like give context to folks here who don't know what that poem is. But you're talking about how you have been obsessed with that poem for years. And quote, could not find a way to express the beautiful tension which Hafez sets with the verb pairings in the poem. To adjust this, I boiled down the type to square modules to strictly look at the architecture of the words, which I thought was really interesting because I think often when you're kind of like haunted by a work of art in that way, where you feel that kind of tension in a work of art or in a poem and you don't know how to articulate it, like I think people kind of stay at the level of the symbolic or the abstract instead of like going to its form and like really examining the architecture of it and like examining the form and doing like a formal analysis almost. So yeah, I thought it was interesting how you kind of like, because you didn't know how to express that tension, you just went first to the formal aspects of the words. That was quite interesting to me.
Yeah, in a way, I was for years tortured by this beauty and tension in this poem. And another thing that I don't know how this allowed me more to play with it, but I was watching a Buckminster Fuller documentary, and we can't even categorize him because he's like a philosopher, but an architect, but a physicist and a mystic. And he has these quotes that he almost sounds like a non-English speaker in, which I love because I can see how his brain is working. But he was like, tension is the great integrity. And I was like, that explains exactly this poem, because everything's kind of connected together so in such a, I don't know, in such a like exact equilibrium and very engineered or something. And that just allowed me to be like, you know what, I can go ahead and break that down and look at that formally. But yeah.
Engineered is a interesting word choice, but I see what you mean because of how the poem is structured. Do you mind just giving like a very brief context of this poem so that people maybe who don't know?
Sure. So this poem is very delicate actually, and has a lot of rhyming and rhythms, and basically it starts with the first verse is Saman buyan qobar gham cho benshinan benshanand. So benshinan and benshanan means to sit and to seat. So the ah is the only difference, and the ah is the first letter of the Persian alphabet, and it means as the jasmine scented ones sit, they seat the dust of sorrow. And that is, the jasmine scented ones are the mystics because they have this wonderful, scent. And when they come and they sit, so when they relax, the dust of sorrow relaxes too. So they seat the dust of sorrow, or they settle it. And that, and to settle the dust in Persian literature, it means for an opening, that things open up. And so that's the opening of the poem too. And then every verse goes through these verb pairings that are very just kind of teasing, because sometimes they're very close, like this one. Sometimes they're exactly the same, but because of the rest of the stanza, they mean totally different things, and sometimes they're different. So this kind of, it's kind of like, I don't know, like hip hop, or it has this very rhythmic quality to it that is also very shrewd and like compact with meaning. And but I can't really say what the meaning of the whole poem is, because every stanza, it's a world to itself. And so it makes it a very special Hafiz poem. And this is so interesting. I'm going to tell you this because every Iranian has a Hafiz book in their house, and we divine with it. And years ago, I was like, oh my God, I love this poem. Let me ask Hafiz, what do you think if I work on this poem, Salam Buyan? And Salam Buyan came when I opened it. So just saying, giving a little background of my relationship to this poem too. And ever since then, like it's been more than 10 years, it's been circulating, and I've been doing this and that with it until now.
So it's been more than 10 years that you've been really thinking about this poem.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been going through different iterations with different materials and processes.
Let me just change this. So I guess this is like a drawing version of these wood maquettes, but yeah, so you can see the verb pairings that Golnar was talking about, and how they're kind of merging in this like slope formation. I just wanted to show the silk screens too, because they're just really beautiful. And I think the silk screens, which also are constituted by the verb pairings of that poem, but I think the silk screens really literalize the kind of like the way that what did Han say in that quote? Like taking the Hafez poem as like, quote, structures of strict forms that shine all by themselves. And I think Golnar really like literalizes that here, because she's just playing with the forms of the poem, and it's shining all by themselves, as the philosopher said. Yeah, so I just want to show that real quick. And this is also another version of the verb pairings, and I want to switch gears to talk about translation a little. And I think we often think about translation in the linguistic sense, so translating from one language to another. But what I really like about your works is that they really open up other possibilities of what translation can be. So, for example, translation between the visual and the textual, translation between word and image, translation between different mediums and materials. For example, when you transfer like the letters into the word blocks, translation of emotions or affect into concrete forms, translation between 2D and 3D, like in the images that I just showed. And I think translation is especially fraught in the visual realm. And one of the tensions that really interests me is the tension or the conflict between word and image. And this is something that has been big in the history of religious art and Islamic art and Christian art, but also today in questions of how to write about art. And that's something that I think about a lot as someone who dabbles in art criticism, like, what is the best way to write about art in a way that's not didactic or like it's not over-explanatory, but kind of leaves space for people to think about it. Anyway, so all these questions and conflicts between the word and the image. And my question to you is, how does translation or mistranslation function for you in your practice? And how does translation relate to iteration, which is important in your practice? Or how does translation relate to modularity or to form in general?
Mm-hmm. So I just have to say this, kind of like to talk about all of this, because it reminds me the fact that I think I learned and unlearned and forgot both English and Persian so many times. created distance between me and language in general. And so I always am tickled by words, and I love the roots of words. And then also the fact that Persian and English are from the same family. They're both Indo-European. And so this was also another impetus for me to kind of open it up. Also, like, the American involvement in Persian-speaking countries, Iran and Afghanistan both. So I felt like there's already so many connections. And translation and all of this, I mean, I tried different things, like translating the poem and trying to work, then going from the word to, I really have been struggling with translating the words with imagery that symbolizes the word. And I was having a lot of trouble doing that. I may get there, and I think I will try, but then I kind of retracted, and then I said, let's just look at the form. And then there was an aha moment that is a translation of the word, to look at its form. Yes, it's totally, then the question of, these are all, we all agreed on what language will look like. So it's totally man-made. And how does this translate the meaning of what this word is carrying? And then I said, you know what, I don't care. I'm just going to play with it. And so then I'm really interested in material. And I think that all of those things are super valid when you are looking at conveying meaning. And why not trust that kind of, idea of translation. So that's when I started to look at material carrying translation, process carrying translation, form carrying translation, and then yeah, because I guess, this is my field. I'm more of an expert in making form and looking at form than at language itself, and it's kind of more linguistic way. But
do you think like the material translations are kind of a way for you to bypass having to translate the Persian into English, or is it not really like that linear? Like you wouldn't have translated it into English anyway, you would have kept it in Persian.
Oh, you mean why I didn't translate it literally into English and then work with English form?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like it seems like instead of translating the Persian poetry into English in your works, you like pursue other forms of translations, like material translations and formal translations. But I'm guessing like that wasn't an intentional choice. Like that was just.
Well, I just think there is no justice done to the language if it's just translated to English, because the sound is very important, and the way that culturally it looks. I mean, it's all kind of bound together in one package, and to disrupt. And also, I'm really interested in the Persian form because it looks more like drawing, and it's I have a very different relationship to it, and it serves a very different purpose for me. In fact, I'm much more at ease to write and communicate in English, but then Persian is something else. And it has become the language of the archive, and these things that I'm digging through in my past, and also the language of poetry, which is kind of also resonating with the archive in that longing way. But then we are borrowing this from Arabic, and then completely using it in a Indo-European way. So not respecting the structure and the grammar of Arabic, but just using the form. So there it gets a little bit interesting too.
Sorry, were you? The sound dimension of Persian that you mentioned is quite interesting, and I don't know if historically it was like more of a spoken language or not, but you mentioned that the oral or like the sound aspect is important to you. And I guess I'm wondering, like, when you were making these maquettes and even this prototype here, like, is it there at all, like the sound dimension? Like, is there a way in which like something can seem loud to you but visually, or like, you know, that kind of translation between like sound and visuals, I think also exists, but is that something that you kind of like consciously were thinking about at all, like the spoken aspect of version when you were making these?
Right. I don't know if this is going to answer it, but I really love the sound of awe and what is being emphasized here, because that's the only difference between the two words. And by this crisscrossing, what is being emphasized, especially in the other, because this is the language is sleeping here in my floor piece, which is very similar to this. It's standing up. Yeah. So the awe becomes diagrammed, and that's the sound of awe, which actually connects you to the higher being because it's the standing up figure. And then I just wanted to say something about landscapes, because I feel like I'm reading right now Rudolf Arnheim, and he talks about our memories working as these visual landscapes. And he might be really visually biased, but I definitely agree with him because that's how I operate. And I think that I suspect different people operate differently, and not everyone's going to agree with him, but this verse really creates a landscape for me, and I think it is connected to the sounds, maybe more indirectly, but
yeah, I didn't notice like the verticals kind of reaching toward the sky, if you will. Okay, let me just go to this photo. I really loved the installation of the wood maquettes on the floor, paired with this seesaw. Or I actually thought it was a scale at first when I first saw it. So this beam that kind of upholds. So you see that on each end of the scale, or like the seesaw, you see the two different verbs that make up the four wooden maquettes. And I think the seesaw really like visually expresses the tension that you were talking about in the poem between the verbs. And your mom's eyes are kind of like right above it all, watching. And from a certain angle, when you enter this exhibition space, it almost looks like the maquettes and the seesaw are kind of like her body or something. Could you just speak to your process in coming up, or in producing or creating the seesaw? I think it's like formally very interesting, because it's kind of like a literalization of that kind of tension in the poem.
Yeah, so I love that you asked this question, because the seesaw came really late in the game, and so did the floor installation. Actually, they were just being made until the last minute, and the seesaw was made by this wonderful friend, Kat Chamberlain. So I have to give her the credit because she made it so nice. So we kind of collaborated on it, but she made my vision come true, but even better. Anyways, so the verbs are benchinan and benchanan, to sit and to seat something else. And I've been going to playgrounds every day now. And it just intuitively came to me that, because I was looking to have an installation specifically for Q, because a lot of this work was already existing, but I wanted to make it more specific, more intentional, and connect the bodies of work. And at first I was going to make all the verbs, and then I said, no, let's just edit back and let's concentrate on a few. And the first pair was the one that I wanted to just keep working with. And so I sat them down on the seesaw. The seesaw just came to me very intuitively. It was there, it was in my mind, because of its sitting, and also because of its comparativeness, right? And I said, yet another kind of looking at these words is looking at their weights. How different are they in their weights, and are they at all? They are a little bit, actually, and the awe makes the benchanan a little bit heavier. And so And so that became a really good pair then with this crisscrossing of the Benchina and Benchana. So they're doing two different kinds of dance or being compared in two different ways. And then when I took, you know, you never know how you're going to install something. I just took the seesaw and it does look like a scale. So I actually really like that ambiguity between the two, because I could have made it so it looked more like a seesaw, but we decided not to, because again, we are comparing, right? And also another thing, my last name means Adili, means to kind of bring justice, and it comes from this thing that I guess I heard this story, I don't know how true it is, my great grandfather had behind a donkey, this like bag, two-sided bag that he kept balancing things. So it's like we balance things as a family. I don't know. But so I don't know, this all came to my mind as I was kind of pursuing this thought. And then when I took it to the space, it just had to be under my mom's face because of the eyes and the pairing and the framing. It just didn't want to go anywhere else. So I just put it there. And it just, you know, it's so interesting because this is kind of an homage to the hardship my mom went through raising me as a single mom in war, and just, you know, being separated from a young woman, being separated from her husband because of everything. So, you know, sometimes she says, I don't know how I endured those days, but I did. And it just makes sense for her to be residing on top of all of this, like, emotion.
I guess I'll end on the note that the quote that you just said from Arnheim about tension being integrity, or like kind of like an equivalency between the two. I see it really embodied in this seesaw. Because for me, I'm like, oh, like, yeah, like the seesaw or like the scale, like, does have this tension because it's like the point of a scale, for example, is to kind of like make things even. But like the context that you normally see scales is in like justice and law and, like, you know, areas where integrity is very prioritized. Anyway, something about the Arnheim quote that you just said really resonates with me when I'm looking at this. Okay, I think we might be almost out of time. Are there any last words that you wanted to kind of end on, Golnar?
I just want to thank everyone from Q who did so much work for this exhibition, and also CBA. You know, Camilo, with the help of others, put the work up because I couldn't be there, and it's a huge task. And, you know, also Q, you know, just in these fragile moments, things changing, and, you know, having someone like me who's like really obsessive on top of them. So thank you so much for tolerating me and doing so much good work. I have loved the experience. And yeah, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you so much, Sarah, for helping me, you know, explain and give context to this work.
Thank you. This was so fun. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Okay. I think, are we going to open this up for questions?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Golnar, Sarah, and Emily, for your presentations, conversations, ideas. There are already a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to start reading them. And we have a good 15-20 minutes to comment on them. So the first one says, as an Iranian, is from Nabil Sabio Azadi. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. As an Iranian New Zealander, artist, and anthropologist at the University of Queensland, who also focuses on books, I certainly have a few questions so far. were you you would first like to head into, or where you would first like to head in terms of your expressed interest in further research into the diasporic experience?
So where I would like to go, like I said, I would like to go more into kind of understanding memory and childhood, because I work with that a lot, both with my own and with my child's. Now, language becomes really interesting to me in this investigation, and memory and how children play. So again, I think I am repeating myself. I don't know where this research is going to take me. This is the thing. I don't know what form is going to come out of it. But I have a few projects. I mean, one of it is kind of commercial. I want to make these alphabets accessible to many, I think. So I want to talk to designers or people who are on the production side of things, because it's kind of a shame that my child can't play with my artist book because it costs $2,500 and she's going to ruin it. But that's really unfair because she gave me the idea and now she can't touch it. So what I want to do is and also when I look for her to buy Persian material, I can't find good ones, So I'm like, there is a need for this. And so maybe I can do that. But I'm too impatient and kind of want to like progress my art into more complex things. So we'll see how I can manage and balance everything, but that is a desire. And so for my own art, I don't know what form is going to come out of all of this research that I'm going to plan ahead. But I am kind of going towards this idea that as human beings, we have our own language, and just kind of looking at the marks that children make early on. There's this guy, Arnaud Stern, he's French, and he, did all this research with children and painting with them and archived over time and has some ideas about so I want to just research him, and I don't know what's going to come out of the other end. Does that answer your question, Nabil?
Farsi is an exceptional language. Its prosody, intonation, and tone are famously malleable. And that's not even to mention the lexicon. Do you see these, your sculptural transliterations, as being a pedagogic tool first and foremost?
No, because I'm an artist, but they are also, I think, they are inspired by pedagogy or pedagogical or didactic tools, I guess. But that's not the end goal of them. But I think that they might be doing. And thank you for saying about the Persian language, because I don't know how objectively it is, but they sound really good.
Okay, interesting side note. Most of our Iranian last names were chosen so recently by our grandfathers more often. What's in a name? I often wonder about how the meaning of our surnames impact us psycho-spiritually and reflexively as artists and humans. What are your thoughts?
Oh my God, this is so deep. I love it. Let's have a drink over this. But I think that maybe the seesaw, I was reminded of the story of my, great grandfather with a donkey at the doorways of Tehran, as he was bringing stuff in from Isfahan, is what I'm told. But I find names so interesting, and I think that they do shape us, and we shape them. And what can I say? Again, it goes back to like yeah, the meanings that are embedded in them, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. Did I answer that question? I don't know.
A broader question. Just earlier today, the well-known Pinoy Guyanese curator from Toronto, Farah Yusuf, observed that contemporary abstraction has been mostly the realm of the white artist and that diasporic artists tend to feel forced to address their origins and trauma. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, it's like the Black artist wasn't doing abstraction and um yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't really have any formed ideas about that, but I just do what I do, which is very abstract, but informed by those traumas. So yeah, just just keep doing what you want to do.
Um, well, I have a comment, and I don't know if it's a question or if it will become a question, but so I see it from the point of view of a person who doesn't speak or understand or read Farsi, and you make you know the language accessible by not so much the meaning or the content, but by creating this modular structure that that is very architectural. Um, and I feel that that relationship between what Emily was talking about before, like content and form, uh, it's a way of opening this language element to other people who don't have access because of the content. So it's also it brings it, and maybe that's a note of art in architecture. It has like a relationship with music as well, with like kind of a spatial musicality to the disposition of the language in the space. I don't know if that is something you think about when you're producing it, or it's something that is a result of your practice.
Yes, no, I think about music a lot. I think about music like, let's say, for in the context of this poem, the installation, there's a lot of music in there, and it's because of the rhythmic quality of that poem and the tension. All of it reminds me of techno and the movement. So things are coming, they're getting compressed, and then they're decompressing and opening up. And I think that my education in architecture has been really a wonderful and fun experience, because I feel like I got that translational tool through architecture, and being able to infuse movement and rhythm. And I know nothing theoretically speaking about music, but I love music, and I am very I like to dance. So I feel like I can kind of break down music and put it back together. And yeah, and the modular thinking also comes from architecture, and building blocks, and I find the cube so interesting, because it's like the fundamental. It's like when I was talking to Sarah, like when I went back to the fundamentals when COVID happened, hand washing, alphabet, the cube became the module, and because children also play with it, and it's also kind of a little bit dumb. It's not sophisticated like the rectangular form when it becomes volumetric, but it's like kind of like rigid. And I kind of like that rigidity. When I started to build with it, it kind of looked really naive. I don't know how to say it, but like really elemental, and I was like, let's try to explain this really sophisticated poetry with this really elemental module or unit. So I don't know, I kind of veered off of your question or comment, but
No, thank you very much. um, Sarah Burney has a question for us.
So we've said the word archive multiple times and we're talking about Farsi. I was wondering, is Farsi an archive for you in the sense that you are going back and mining the language, or is it still a living experience for you where you're making new associations with Farsi?
It's really interesting because I think it did become this archive or this very intimate moment that I want to make with me and my past, me and my country, and me and poetry. So yes, it does serve that function. But now again, that I only speak Persian to my daughter. So now it's becoming alive, which I love because I want to practice it and I want it to be alive and used daily. And so we now play with it. And it's been a pleasure. But also I love the archive aspect that you just brought up. It's an interesting way to contextualize it because it makes me really look at it as like an investigator, and really just, treasure it kind of, and dissect it and put it back together. So yeah.
Over here, we have a question from John O. Any techno recommendations? Thanks in advance. This is a very thought-provoking discussion.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I have not listened to techno in a long time, but but I was more involved with that years ago. And you should listen to the work of Francesco Tristano. He's a Luxembourgish musician who lives in Barcelona, and he goes between classical piano and club techno. So it's really fun that he just has that vast, kind of repertoire and can pull from both places. And he's a friend and I love his music. Oh man, it's been so long. I do have, and I can't remember the name right now. Sorry, it's not accessible to me. But that was a fun question.
Do we have any more questions or comments? Okay. Well, maybe with this note we can end, and just remind you that until tomorrow, the exhibition will be open at Q Out Foundation, and through the 26th of March, we'll have Father Gabe Water at Center for Book Arts. So thank you very much, Golnar, Emily, Sarah, for your effort and your presentations. It was really nice to listen to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and for your lovely questions. And yeah, and everybody, for Emily, Sarah, Wendy, Camilo, thank you so much for everything. And I hope to see many of my friends and others at the closing tomorrow at Q. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.